Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Elyse. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
All right, so Elyse is here. Elyse, by the way, on our team is like the goddess of detail. She is the one that we go to for all kinds of information about the common application, like all those little details that stress out the rest of us. Elyse is an absolute master at. So thank you so much for being on our team,
I
as
never miss
well
a
as
chance to talk about the Common App, so yes.
well, we are very glad you feel that way. So, all right, so let's just dive right into it. I mean, I think that people are pretty nervous about the Common App, and I'll just start by saying, if you haven't started yet, start. I talk to people who say, "Don't do I have to like submit it the right when I get into it?" No. Will I accidentally submit it? No. So let's assume though that people are in there, they've filled it out to the best of their ability. What are their next steps?
So when you're in the My Colleges tab of the Common App, there will be a place that says review and submit. And you can only really get through that page if you see green check marks everywhere else in the application, right? So all the questions are filled out. You've done the recommenders in FERPA, any separate writing sections, they all have that nice green check. And then once you hit review and submit, again, I do the same thing, Sally. I say, don't worry, you're going to see a preview first.
Mhm.
You're not actually submitting yet. So there's 3 steps to go through after you hit review and submit. So the first is that you'll see it's called the final review, and it will pop up a PDF of your application. And a new feature this year that's really nice is that the Common App is giving you a heads up to say if this particular college, like right now I'm logged into my account and I pulled up Lafayette College, if Lafayette is choosing to hide some elements of the application because that's just part of their admissions process,
Mhm.
they tell you about it right on this page so that as you're scrolling through the PDF, if you notice, wait a minute, my test scores aren't on here and I wanted them to be on, that is probably why. Or like, why is my social not listed? Why is my race? I listed my race, but it's not showing up. Oh, that's
Mhm.
because Lafayette chose to remove that.
Mhm.
Um, and you can download the PDF. I often recommend students print it out even because
Mhm.
sometimes seeing it on paper looks a little different than seeing it on
Mhm.
the screen.
Mhm.
Once you're okay with how the PDF looks, you actually have to check a box saying, yes, this is it. I've reviewed it. I feel good. You
Mhm.
hit continue. You then go to a payment page. You have to enter all of that. You hit continue. And then you get to a signature and submission page where you type in your name and you check boxes affirming that, yes, this is your own work. Yes, once you submit it, you can't change it. Those sort of things. And then you see the confetti and the balloons and you get very excited because it tells you, congrats, you have applied. So that's the nuts and bolts of, through the Common App at least, how you actually submit that application.
Mhm. Okay. All right, good. So yeah, the big thing to come out though is there are all kinds of double checks in the Common App. Like, so if people forget some of the details you've mentioned, just remember the double checks and that there is a print preview that you can go through. I always
Absolutely.
try and summarize for people. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and if you try to jump ahead, like let's say you've missed a question, it won't that's required. It won't even let you submit. It'll
Mhm.
force you to go back. The one tricky piece I will say though, most colleges have a one-step process. You just have to hit review and submit once. You go through those 3 steps. It sends your entire application, the main part of the Common App, plus that college's supplement. It sends it all at once to that college.
Mhm.
Some universities have chosen to separate because they just want to make your lives that much easier. They've chosen to separate the main supplemental questions that they ask from their essay questions. So it's kind
Mhm.
of like a 2-part supplement. And you'll know if that's the case because when you're working on the application, you'll see that there's questions under a section called application and then questions under a section called writing supplement. It's
Mhm.
all part of the supplement, but they separate it. So that will actually necessitate that the student does the review and submit process twice for
Mhm.
those particular schools. So it's going to be like extra check marks, and you'll know for sure, if you go to your dashboard tab of the Common Application, it will say application submitted, writing supplement submitted, or downloaded if it's actually been downloaded. So you need to make sure you see that.
Hmm.
submission or the downloaded on the dashboard tab.
And do that. I actually had a student a few years ago who forgot to do that and then didn't double check, even though she got an email like everybody else to double check on this. Luckily, the school, she had submitted the Common App, and the schools believed her. I told her to go talk to her counselor immediately and have her counselor call the schools. And so they accepted it late, past the deadline, because they were
Mhm.
like, okay, we believe you, and this does happen sometimes. But really, the stress and heartache that she dealt with until the colleges opened and she was able to talk to someone, or her counselor was able to, nobody needs to deal with that. And there's no guarantee that every college would accept it. Some
No,
colleges can be stricter than others. So yeah,
absolutely.
do double check. Just go make sure. Yeah, I love it. I go onto my students' accounts sometimes with their permission, of course, and I see the downloaded and I'm like, okay, we've done what we can do now. So,
And I know this was something that we were planning on talking about, but sometimes students get a little nervous if they see that it was, let's say they submitted it at the last possible minute. It's
mhm,
due on January 1. They submit it on January 1, but the college obviously is not open on New Year's Day.
mhm,
So they submit it on January 2. Oh, that's after the deadline. That's when they actually downloaded it. Is that a problem? No. As long
mhm,
as you submit it
mhm,
by 11:59 your time, not the college's time, but your wherever you are living time, whether you live in China
mhm,
or England or Canada or the US, wherever, you are going to be submitting it by 11:59 your time.
mhm. And that is good to know as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, you don't have to figure out. Imagine if you're in Arizona, for example. I never know what time it is there.
true,
You
true.
know? So,
Sometimes mountain, sometimes Pacific, right? It's like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. What if, and I think this is many students' nightmare, what if you notice a mistake on your application after you've submitted?
This happens.
Mhm,
And even though parents and students don't love this response, when I give it to them, I say if it's minor, if you notice a tiny misspelling, if you notice punctuation,
mhm,
something like that, you first of all, you can't change it for schools that
mhm,
you have already submitted to. Like it's not even an option to somehow resubmit, even if it's before the deadline. But I try to calm my students by reminding them that those little flaws, yes, they annoy us, but in some small way, that kind of tells the colleges that you're human and we make little mistakes sometimes.
mhm,
Sometimes that overly polished application can look too perfect because so many people have reviewed it. Not that you
mhm.
want mistakes, not that I'm encouraging anyone to put
Right.
a mistake deliberately, but if a small one sort of sneaks through, if you didn't notice it,
Mhm,
and your parent or guardian or whoever reviewed it or mentor or college counselor or teacher reviewed it and they didn't notice it, it's probably likely the admissions reader may not notice it either. So if it's minor, fret not.
mhm,
If you have not yet applied to some colleges, let's say you had an early round and you catch the mistake, you can fix it before you submit it for your regular decision schools. You just have to go in to the main part of your application, make that change, it'll save for you, and then any new schools will get the new application. Um,
mhm,
but if it's a bigger mistake, like you cut and pasted the wrong essay into the why I love your school
mhm.
supplemental response, then
Right.
you're going to want to reach out to the college, probably send an email or check their portal to see if you can upload that material so that it can be added to your application.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. I mean, I worked at the University of Chicago. We cared deeply about the essays. We talked about them. It never came up in committee if there was like one typo. If an essay was riddled, multiple, right? Then it might come up because that was seen as being sloppy. But if a student had one or even two typos, clearly there'd been an effort to edit it, but something just slipped by. Please don't stress about that at all. Never came up in committee. Never, never, never. But yeah, if the essay said, I want to talk about how great it would be to attend Northwestern, that was noticed. That was noticed. So yeah, that is something you would want to reach out about.
And we, as humans ourselves on the admission side, we always did our best to not look at the mistake
Mm-hmm.
the application. Like we try to give you the benefit of the doubt. Um, and we will look at the corrected information. But a lot of it, I feel
Mhm.
like, depends on some schools will be able to include everything that you've submitted, and so they'll see perhaps the mistaken essay plus
Mhm.
whatever you've submitted later. Others may actually be able to just re-upload like a corrected version, so they may not
Mhm.
even see them. You just don't know exactly what they're seeing. So just have lots of people review it. Use that
Mhm.
PDF print preview to
Mhm.
try and make sure that everything looks the way you want it to look.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't expect, yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I was working with a student this year who didn't mention that, like, he filled out his parental information, and I said, "Wait, didn't both your parents go to college?" He's like, "Yeah, did I not put that in?" I'm like, "No, you didn't." You didn't. Like, list all the answer the questions, make sure that you've answered all the questions, even if they're not required. That's the point that I'm trying to make there.
Well, for the ones you feel comfortable answering, right? You
Correct,
don't,
correct. No,
yes,
fair enough, fair
yes.
enough. Yeah, there might be some questions that you feel like it's just, yeah, it's not in your value system to answer it, and then that is absolutely your choice. Yeah. And there's some questions that I actually actively tell students not to respond to, like a social security number. If you don't need it for financial aid, why put that information out there? Right.
Hmm.
The colleges may end up following up with you, and that might be a different situation. But why volunteer that information if you don't absolutely need it, which
Sure.
you do if you're applying for financial aid? And what if you receive a new award? What if this is, you didn't make any errors, but there's an important update. You got something pretty cool. Maybe you got one of the National Science Fair awards. Like, I can't remember what they're called now. It was Westinghouse years ago. It's gone through a lot of iterations.
Regeneron, I think, might
Yeah,
be one of the
Regeneron.
current ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, this is another one of those it depends situations. So let's say you are in a spring sport or a winter sport and you just found out that you got named captain. That's a pretty
Mhm.
big deal. That shows leadership.
Mhm.
That I would recommend checking on the college's suggestions for how to update your application. Most of them have
Mhm.
information on their portals to say, here's where you can upload or you can email us. But for small, even if it feels like, oh, but this is new, like I joined a new club
Mhm.
or I performed in my piano recital and I did really well. Um, that's probably not going to move the needle. So unless it's something that you feel really changes the tenor of your application and your activities page,
Mhm.
something significant, something that maybe speaks to one of your main interests or an academic focus, like your pre-major, that might be worth looking into contacting the college to let them know about that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. But yeah, you don't want to contact them all the time about tiny things. That can even be annoying, to be honest. These are very, very busy people. There are exceptions to that. When I worked at Whittier, you could really reach out for whatever reason. We were a small college. We wanted to be talking to the students all the time. But yeah, any, larger public schools that are quite selective, probably don't want to know.
And there's
So,
sort of a little pro tip is that let's say you are gathering a few updates, like you have some of these new awards or highlights. Maybe it doesn't seem significant enough to send in that individual email in January.
mhm,
Um, but let's say you hear back from a school in February, let's say that you got waitlisted. I know that's sort of late for waitlist, but let's just say you can now send that information. Like sometimes
mhm.
holding on to these updates is great in case you get deferred or if you get
Right.
oh, I was thinking of deferred. So if you
Yeah.
get deferred or if you get waitlisted, sometimes that's the perfect opportunity to send in those updates because you need to say something new at that point anyway,
Mhm.
right? So it's a good avenue at that point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, if you want content, listeners, about deferral and waitlist, we got a lot of that. So feel free to research the kinds of updates the colleges might be looking for. But we got a little tip right now from Elyse. And so what if you applied regular decision? This is kind of a newer thing,
Hmm.
but you decide you want to be considered for early decision two or early action two. Some schools do offer early decision two or even early action two, which always seems funny to me, but
I
whatever.
know, I
Like,
know.
it's like, ED2 I get, EA2 I don't get, but anyway.
Right. So basically the question is, what if you want to change sort of like the the application type, right? So I know even there are students now in early December who have not gotten their decision back from a college that they applied regular to, and they're now hoping, oh, can you put me in the early pool? Or
Hmm.
somebody in the early pool who now wants to come out and they haven't gotten the decision. Or let's say you applied regular to a school, and you do decide, yeah, I really would like to commit as ED2, then you have to reach out to that college
Hmm.
by email or get on the phone, better yet, and call them and find out, ask to speak to an admissions officer and let them know that you'd like to change your application type. Some schools will say, no, I'm sorry, it's too late in the process. Others will be able to make that switch for you in their system, but that's not something you can change. If already submitted, you can't change it through the Common App alone.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is something that has to happen through the colleges. I will say I haven't had a student not be able to switch to ED2 if they did it early enough. So I think colleges tend to be pretty open to that as long as it's before the deadline. After the deadline for ED2, that's where it might not work.
Hmm. Hmm.
So and how to demonstrate continued interest then after you've submitted an application? I think that is really hard for students. I mean, they're like, well, what do I do now? And in many cases, the answer is nothing. Like, and actually, I'll bring up for the University of California system, they don't want to hear from you at all. You can reach out until the cows come home, and they're like, there's not really a mechanism for doing that because they don't take into account that information. Lots of other colleges are a little bit more open.
I always like to think of this waiting period as an opportunity, if it makes sense, to get to know the school a little better in case you
Hmm.
are waitlisted or you are deferred, because maybe you happen to notice that there's a webinar hosted by the department that you're interested in. The English department is having this great webinar with one of their professors, and you're able to listen in on it. You'll then be able to use that information when you write your love letter down the road of,
Hmm.
I'm sad I was deferred, but this is one more reason why I love your school, something like
Hmm.
that. Um, and yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes the smaller schools, the less selective schools, they don't mind the little email hello, but
Hmm.
only if there's something in there that doesn't feel like a waste of time, right? You
Yeah,
have to make it worth their effort to read that email. So
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But this is a place where thank you notes can be great too. That's never going to be a waste of time. So,
a handwritten thank you note touches the heart of the admissions officer. It does.
yeah, without a doubt.
A
All right.
genuine call. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. No, we all love that. Snail mail. How wonderful. So, all right. Thank you so much, Elise. This was great.
My pleasure.
All right. And thank you to Jen Wilcox and Lauren Randall. And everyone, please join us next year for our discussion on who really gets into the highly selective, or let's call them highly rejective, because that's what they are if they're denying 96+% of their students, more commonly known as the Ivies, and what they do to distinguish themselves. Like who gets in, how do they distinguish themselves? In addition, and more cheerfully, if you're considering looking north to Canadian universities, which I recommend because they've got a lot of good ones, you're in luck as we have an admission officer from the University of Victoria as one of our guests. I think that is pretty exciting. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. You can also download every show for free on Amazon Music. And if you're curious about other topics, remember to look through our archives. You can find them with our blog posts on blog.getintocollege.com. And don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.